I froze as my husband's angry voice echoed through the quiet hospital room. His eyes, full of rage I knew too well, locked onto mine. "You think you can talk back to me now?" he growled, stepping closer with a suitcase in his hand. I was too weak to move, my body drained from weeks of dialysis, stuck in bed. Suddenly, he raised the small suitcase and, without warning, slammed it against the side of my head. The blow felt like a gunshot inside my skull. I gasped and clung to the bed rail, my fingers shaking. The ivy in my arm pulled painfully as I twisted in shock. Then I heard the terrified scream of my son, just before the door burst open and footsteps rushed in. Was this how it would end? Hurt and helpless in a hospital bed, betrayed by the man who once promised to protect me? Hello, my name is Sarah Miles, and I'm 42 years old. For most of my adult life, I was a housewife. I lived in West Haven, a quiet city that from the outside seemed full of charm and calm. I was married to a man named Daniel, and together we had a 7-year-old son named Alex. To anyone looking in from the outside, we looked like the picture-perfect family. Daniel had a stable job in logistics, I managed the home, and Alex was a sweet, smart little boy who loved to read bedtime stories with me and draw spaceships on the walls of his room with washable markers. It seemed ideal, even enviable, but like many illusions, it was built on something fragile and false. Daniel and I met through mutual friends at a backyard barbecue. He was confident, polite, and said all the right things. He smiled easily and made people laugh. I still remember how he held out a plate of grilled chicken to me and joked, "Good food and good company. How could I not fall in love today?" I laughed then, not knowing how that one interaction would shift the course of my life. Within a year, we were married. I had been working as a marketing assistant at the time, but Daniel told me he wanted us to have a traditional household, one where he worked and I stayed home to raise our children. I gave up my job and my independence for the dream he promised. At first, it felt like the right decision. He brought flowers on Fridays, made breakfast on weekends, and told me often how lucky he was to have me. I believed him. But as time went on, things began to shift. The warmth in his voice cooled. The smiles came less often. The small gestures disappeared entirely. Daniel no longer asked about my day. He began speaking to me in commands rather than conversations, when to serve dinner, when to have laundry done, why the dishes weren't stacked the way he liked. If I tried to express how I felt, he would scoff and say, "You're a housewife, Sarah. What are you even stressed about?" I started shrinking inside my own skin. My thoughts became small. My voice, even smaller. But I stayed. I stayed because of Alex. I stayed because I believed Daniel's cruelty might be temporary. I stayed because the fear of breaking apart our family seemed heavier than the pain of staying silent. I convinced myself things might change. That maybe one day, the man who handed me that plate of grilled chicken would come back. But the truth was, that man never existed, not really. As the years passed, Daniel's emotional distance grew sharper and more cutting. It wasn't just silence or indifference anymore. It was criticism layered into everyday life. If dinner was late, he'd mutter something about how I had one job. If Alex made noise in the living room while he was on a call, he'd glare at me like I had failed to raise a decent child. If the laundry basket wasn't emptied exactly the way he liked, he'd sigh, slam doors, or walk past me like I didn't exist. I tried everything to keep the peace. I adjusted my routines to match his moods, kept the house pristine, and smiled through clenched teeth. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough for him. Daniel changed jobs frequently, blaming coworkers, bosses, or office politics for his inability to stay employed for more than a year at a time. Every time he lost a job, the tension at home thickened. He took out his frustration on me, saying I made things harder for him. "You don't understand what pressure is," he'd say. "You sit at home all day doing nothing. At least contribute by making my life easier." His words didn't just sting, they buried themselves in my bones. But what made it worse was how his behavior started affecting Alex. Daniel's temper, once reserved for me, began to spill over onto our son. If Alex left toys on the floor or spilled juice, Daniel would lash out, shouting or punishing him over small, innocent mistakes. I tried to intervene, to protect Alex as best I could, but Daniel would snap at me too. Maybe if you taught him some discipline, I wouldn't have to, he'd bark, as if fatherhood was a burden he had never signed up for. I stopped arguing. I learned to anticipate the storms, to keep Alex away when I sensed Daniel's fuse burning short. I carried the weight of our home, of our son's emotional safety, and of my own vanishing self-worth. I often cried in silence, late at night, once Alex was asleep. My reflection in the mirror felt unfamiliar. I had turned into someone who flinched at sudden movements, who apologized without reason, who lived in a constant state of anxiety. But I still told myself that leaving wasn't an option, not yet. I had no job, no savings, no backup plan. And so I stayed until my body gave up before I could. It started with exhaustion I couldn't explain. No matter how much I slept, I woke up feeling drained. My legs swelled, my appetite faded, and I constantly felt nauseous. I told myself it was just stress. After all, Daniel's mood swings and the pressure of raising Alex alone could wear anyone down. But things got worse. I'd stand in the kitchen and feel the room spin. My hands trembled when I folded laundry. There were days I had to sit on the floor while making Alex's lunch because my knees felt too weak to support me. One evening, while washing dishes, I collapsed. I don't remember falling, only the sound of glass shattering and Alex's voice screaming, "Mom." When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed, a nurse checking my pulse, and a soft beeping sound echoing from the monitor beside me. Tubes ran from my arm to an IV. The lights were too bright. My body felt like it had given up. The doctors told me my kidneys were failing. The damage had built up slowly over time, unnoticed and untreated. I needed immediate dialysis and would have to remain in the hospital until my condition stabilized. I didn't fully understand everything they said at first. The medical terms blurred together. All I could think about was Alex, who was watching him. Was he okay? Did he see me fall? My parents, Margaret and Robert, arrived soon after the diagnosis. They took over everything, caring for Alex, talking to the doctors, managing the daily routines I could no longer handle. They didn't ask questions. They just stepped in with quiet, unwavering support. I cried when I saw them. Not because I was sick, but because for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Daniel, on the other hand, didn't show up. Not the first day. Not the second. Not even after a week. No calls. No messages. Nothing. I had nearly died, and he didn't seem to care. A small part of me still held on to the hope that he'd walk through that door, worried, holding my hand, asking if I was okay. But hope, I was starting to learn, could be cruel. It was nearly the end of the third week when Daniel finally walked into my hospital room. I had just finished a dialysis session, and an IV was still hooked to my arm. I was tired, my body sore, my thoughts scattered, but I sat up a little when I saw him. For a split second, I thought maybe he had come to check on me, to bring Alex, or to apologize for his absence. But the expression on his face told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't angry. He wasn't worried. He was annoyed. He stood at the foot of my bed with his arms crossed, not even bothering to ask how I was. Then, in a flat, cold voice, he said, "Do you have any idea how much of a burden you've become?" The words hit harder than any pain my body had endured these past weeks. I blinked at him, thinking I had misheard. But he kept going. "You're just lying here doing nothing while I have to deal with everything. I can't afford this, Sarah. I'm not made to carry this mess. You need to figure it out." I stared at him, heart pounding, voice trembling. "I didn't choose this, Daniel. I didn't ask for kidney failure. I didn't ask to be in this hospital." He scoffed and stepped closer. "That doesn't matter. I can't keep supporting a woman who's just wasting space. Sell your jewelry. Cover your own expenses. I'm not wasting another dime on you." And then, without a flicker of hesitation, he placed a small suitcase on the chair beside my bed. "I packed your things. When they discharge you, don't bother coming home. There's no place for you in my house anymore." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to spin. "You're serious?" I whispered. "After everything I gave up for you, this is what you do?" He raised his voice. "Don't talk back to me, Sarah. You're useless now. This isn't a partnership, it's charity. And I'm done. I could feel my chest tighten, not from illness, but from something deeper. The years of being silenced, belittled, controlled, they boiled to the surface all at once. I looked him in the eyes and said, "You don't get to throw me away like this." That's when his face twisted. Without warning, he grabbed the suitcase, the very one he had packed for me, and swung it toward me. Before I could react, the hard corner slammed into the side of my head. The pain was sharp, immediate. I cried out, and the sound of Alex's voice pierced through the room. He had been sitting quietly in the corner, watching in stunned silence, but now he screamed, "Stop!" Within seconds, the door burst open. A nurse and a hospital security guard rushed in. "What is going on here?" the nurse demanded. "She provoked me," Daniel shouted, fists clenched, still standing beside the bed. "Step away from her now," the security guard ordered, grabbing Daniel's arm. He resisted, but the guard tightened his hold. "You just assaulted a patient in a hospital. You're not going anywhere." Daniel turned to me one last time, his voice low and seething. "You'll regret this." But I didn't respond. My head throbbed, and tears streamed down my face, not just from the physical pain, but from the final, undeniable proof that Daniel had never loved me. The nurse checked my bleeding head, her voice soft and calm. "You're safe now," she said. "We'll take care of you. He won't come near you again." The hours following the attack blurred into a mix of flashing lights, medical checks, and hushed voices. The nurse pressed gauze to the side of my head as I lay trembling, the pain still radiating from where the suitcase had struck me. Alex held my hand tightly, his small fingers shaking in mine. I tried to stay strong for him, but I could see the fear in his eyes, the confusion of a child who had just watched his father turn into a monster. I whispered, "It's going to be okay," more for myself than for him. Hospital security had already called the police. Within 30 minutes, Daniel was in handcuffs, escorted out through the hospital corridor. I didn't see his face again. I didn't want to. The police took statements from the nurse, the guard, and even brief notes from Alex's reaction. A formal case was opened against him for domestic assault and endangerment. After the chaos settled, the nurse sat beside me and gently asked if there was anyone I could call. Without hesitation, I asked her to dial my parents. My voice was weak, but firm. "Please tell them it's urgent." Less than an hour later, my mother and father walked through the door. My mother rushed to my side, her face stricken with worry, while my father wrapped his arms around Alex, whispering that everything was going to be all right. I broke down. I told them everything. Not just about the suitcase or the hospital, but about the years of emotional abuse, the neglect, the way I had slowly disappeared inside my own home. My mother cried quietly as she wiped my tears, while my father sat in stunned silence, nodding, absorbing the truth. They didn't ask why I stayed. They didn't judge. They simply said, "You're not going back there. Not ever again." Over the next few days, the hospital conducted further scans to ensure there was no serious internal damage from the blow. The wound on my head was treated and bandaged, and I resumed my dialysis schedule under watchful eyes. Every time I opened them, Alex was near, drawing pictures beside my bed or playing with the corner of my blanket. My parents alternated staying overnight, making sure I was never alone. For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone had me. Truly had me. In those quiet moments between the beeping machines and the flow of Ivy, I began to think about the future. Not the one Daniel had promised, but the one I might finally build for myself. I knew healing would take time, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. 3 weeks later, I was discharged from the hospital. My body still needed rest, and I would continue dialysis treatments several times a week, but I was stable. The day I left, my parents were waiting outside with Alex and a folded blanket for my legs. Daniel hadn't contacted me once, not even to ask about Alex. There was no apology, no concern, no remorse. Just silence. That silence told me more than his words ever had. It told me that going back was never an option. I didn't return to our old house. I didn't even drive past it. My parents brought me straight to their home, the one I grew up in. It felt surreal to be back in my childhood bedroom, the wallpaper faded but familiar, my old bookshelf still holding worn novels and picture frames from a better time. But more than anything, it felt safe. Alex had his own small room next to mine. At night, he curled up beside me on the bed, his head resting near my shoulder. He didn't talk much about what he'd seen in the hospital, but sometimes he'd wake up crying and ask, "Mom, are we staying here forever?" And I'd whisper, "Yes, sweetheart. We're not going back." My parents took care of everything. My mother made sure I had what I needed for my dialysis days. My father drove Alex to school and picked him up every afternoon. They were patient, never pushing me to make decisions or talk about the case unless I wanted to. They just made space for me, for Alex, for healing. But even as I rested, I knew this wasn't the end. Daniel had to answer for what he did, not just to me, but to Alex. That suitcase, that blow, the years of emotional erosion, it wasn't something I could let go without consequence. So, after speaking with the police officer assigned to the case, I contacted a lawyer. Her name was Amanda Lark, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm, confident voice. From the first call, I knew she understood. She had handled domestic violence cases before. She listened carefully, asked detailed questions, and then said, "You're not alone in this, Sarah. We're going to fight." We began preparing everything. Hospital records, photographs of my injuries, statements from the nurse and security guard, and proof of Daniel's neglect. I handed Amanda a file I had quietly kept over the years, copies of Daniel's text messages, photos of broken items at home, and a small journal I had written in when I had nowhere else to speak. It was hard reopening those wounds, but necessary. If I wanted a new life, I had to close the door on the old one completely, and that meant seeking justice. Preparing for the court case became part of my healing. It gave structure to my days, something solid to hold on to. Amanda guided me through every step, making sure I understood the legal process, the timeline, the importance of every document and testimony. She never once rushed me or made me feel overwhelmed. Her calm strength became a pillar I leaned on. The court hearing was scheduled 6 weeks after my hospital release. On the morning of the hearing, I woke up early. I dressed in a simple navy blue blouse and slacks. I wasn't trying to impress anyone, I just wanted to feel like myself again, a version of me that had been buried for too long. My mother braided my hair back gently while Alex sat in the hallway playing with a small toy truck. He knew I was going somewhere important, but I hadn't told him the details. All he knew was that his mom was going to be okay and that he was safe now. We arrived at the courthouse with Amanda. My parents sat in the gallery for support. As I stepped into the courtroom, my stomach twisted. Daniel was already there, seated beside his lawyer. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but somehow less. His eyes darted around the room, but he didn't look at me. Maybe he couldn't. Amanda began by laying out the facts, chronological, precise, unflinching. She described the long-term emotional abuse, my diagnosis, the hospital assault, and the impact it had on both me and Alex. Witnesses were called. The nurse who had cared for me, the security guard who had intervened. Their testimonies were clear and honest. They spoke of the fear in my voice, the pain in my eyes, the way Daniel had shown no remorse. Amanda then presented my medical records, the dialysis reports, the head injury from the suitcase, and the psychological evaluations I had undergone. She didn't dramatize anything. She simply told the truth, and the truth was powerful enough on its own. Daniel's lawyer tried to argue that he had simply lost his temper and that it was a moment of frustration. But Amanda stood up, calm as ever, and said, "This isn't about one moment. It's about a pattern of control, cruelty, and violence." Sarah didn't break because of one suitcase. She broke because of years of being treated like she didn't matter. Then it was my turn. I took the stand, hands trembling, voice steady. I told my story from the day we met to the moment the suitcase hit my head. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just told the truth. And when I finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge took his time reviewing everything, testimonies, evidence, medical documentation. The room remained still, as if even the air was waiting for the verdict. I sat quietly beside Amanda, my hands folded in my lap. I didn't look at Daniel. I didn't need to. This moment wasn't about him anymore. It was about reclaiming my voice. Finally, the judge looked up. His words were measured, but firm. The evidence presented in this case clearly demonstrates a pattern of emotional and physical abuse, culminating in a violent assault on a vulnerable individual while hospitalized. The court finds the defendant, Daniel Price, guilty of domestic assault, endangerment, and aggravated battery. He is hereby sentenced to 18 months in state prison and ordered to pay restitution for the victim's medical and legal expenses. The sound of the gavel hitting the desk was like a final exhale, an end to a chapter one had once been too afraid to close. Daniel didn't speak. His lawyer leaned toward him, but he just stared blankly at the floor as officers moved in to escort him out. There was no last look, no apology, and I didn't need one. Afterward, Amanda turned to me and smiled gently.
"You did it," she said.
I nodded, but I wasn't smiling yet. There was one more thing to finish. 2 weeks later, my divorce was finalized. The court granted me full custody of Alex, along with protection orders ensuring Daniel could never approach us again. My name, once tied to a life of fear, was now free. I was no longer Sarah Miles, the wife of Daniel Price. I was just Sarah, mother, survivor, and now, finally, my own person. Walking out of the courthouse that day, the sun felt warmer. My parents stood waiting outside with Alex, who ran into my arms the moment he saw me. I picked him up, still recovering, still healing, but stronger than I had been in years. He smiled and asked, "Can we go get pancakes?" I laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. "Absolutely," I said. "We've earned it." Life after the trial didn't become perfect overnight, but it became peaceful, and that was enough. I stayed with my parents for a few more months while continuing my dialysis treatments and slowly regaining strength. Alex adjusted well to the new routine. He started smiling more, sleeping better, and asking fewer questions about Daniel. The nightmares faded. So did the fear in his eyes. I spent my days resting, helping Alex with schoolwork, and thinking about what came next. One evening, as I sat on the couch watching him color a drawing of our little family, just him, me, and my parents, I realized I didn't want to return to who I was before. That version of me, the one who bent and broke in silence, was gone. I wanted something new, something that belonged only to me. That's when the idea came, a cooking YouTube channel. It sounded small, maybe even silly at first, but I had always loved cooking. It had been the one place I felt creative, relaxed, and in control. My mother smiled when I told her. "Start it," she said. "You've always been good at bringing comfort to others through food."
So I did.
I named the channel Home with Sarah. I began filming simple recipes from my parents' kitchen, easy meals, traditional dishes, lunchbox ideas for kids. I didn't hide my story. I spoke about what I'd been through, not in every video, but enough for people to understand where my strength came from. I shared how cooking had become my therapy, how the rhythm of chopping vegetables and stirring soup gave me peace. To my surprise, people began watching. And not just watching, connecting. Women from all over the country left comments. Some shared their own stories. Others just thanked me for the recipes and the calm tone of my voice. Within a few months, my subscriber count grew. Brands reached out. Revenue started coming in. Slowly, I began saving, not just for Alex's future, but for mine too. Our small apartment above my parents' garage became a cozy new home. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. At night, Alex and I would cook dinner together, sometimes filming new content, sometimes just laughing over pasta. The fear that once ruled our lives had been replaced with joy, healing, and freedom. One night, after posting a new video, I sat beside Alex on the balcony as he pointed to the stars and asked, "Mom, are we going to be okay forever now?" I looked at him and smiled, not with uncertainty, but with truth. "Yes, baby, we already are." But even with all this peace, I felt something inside me say, "This is just the beginning." Months passed, and life began to feel calm again, but not quiet. My YouTube channel continued to grow, and with each new subscriber came messages from women who had stories like mine. Some were still stuck in silence. Others had left but didn't know how to begin again. I read their words late at night, sometimes with tears, sometimes with gratitude, always with a sense of responsibility. One evening, after uploading a simple chicken soup recipe, I sat staring at the comment section. Dozens of women had written, not about the food, but about their lives, how my story gave them strength, how my journey reminded them that they were not alone. That's when I knew I couldn't just move forward. I had to reach back. I started a weekly live stream called Sunday Evenings with Sarah. I didn't have fancy equipment or a studio, just my kitchen, a webcam, and honesty. I talked about fear, resilience, motherhood, recovery, and hope. I shared how I had once felt invisible and how small choices had brought me back to life. Sometimes women joined live. Sometimes they just listened. But every week, more and more hearts gathered, and slowly a quiet community began to form. I also began working with a local women's shelter. I cooked meals once a week for women starting over, just like I had. I sat with them, laughed with them, and sometimes simply listened. Giving back didn't erase my past, but it transformed it. My wounds became windows for others. My voice, once silenced, became someone else's comfort. Alex, now older and wiser than his years, once asked me why I kept helping strangers. I smiled and said, because once I needed someone to remind me I wasn't broken. And now I get to be that someone. As I stood in my kitchen, camera on, apron tied, and a warm dish ready to serve, both to my viewers and to my soul, I realized my story didn't end with survival. It began there. Thank you so much for watching this story. If you found it meaningful or inspiring, please don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective and connect with you. If you'd like to hear more powerful and emotional stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Your support truly means the world to me, and together we can create a community filled with strength, healing, and hope. See you in the next video.